Continuamos con la intervención de Matteo de Leeuw-De Monti, que seguramente es en este salón de actos la única persona que conoció a Sonia Delaunay. Cuando era un niño fue a visitarlo junto a su familia al taller que ella tenía a su estudio en París, puesto que es hijo y nieto de los propietarios de los grandes almacenes Metz&Co, de los que hemos hablado ya, creo que todos, que tuvieron una relación artística durante más de 3 décadas con la familia de Matteo. Eran unos grandes almacenes de lujo que trabajaban con artistas de vanguardia y que conocieron a Sonia en el año 25 en aquella famosa exposición de artes decorativas que tuvo lugar en París, y de ahí surgió una colaboración que duró pues eso, hasta los años 40 y que tenemos la suerte de poder rastrear gracias a una magnífica colección donde tenemos se puede reconstruir todo el proceso creativo. Matteo, por eso, desde hace más de 25 años, se ha dedicado al estudio intensivo de esa colección y de la faceta textil, especialmente de la faceta textil de Sonia Delaunay, investigando, buceando en los archivos y en sus diarios. Es seguramente la persona en el mundo que más conoce la faceta textil de Sonia Delaunay. Ha colaborado en innumerables exposiciones sobre ella, reivindicando esta faceta tan importante de su creación, y para nosotros ha sido un apoyo fundamental en el desarrollo de la exposición. Ha trabajado con nosotros, conmigo, durante meses y meses, pero además con una paciencia y una dedicación increíbles. No deja escapar ni un mínimo detalle. Es exhaustivo y cuidadoso hasta el infinito, de verdad. Y estoy segura que el repaso que va a hacer sobre los tejidos de la faceta del diseño textil de Sonia Delaunay va a ser reveladora para todos. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Por cierto, aparte de eso, él ha sido un magnífico cantante de ópera y sus interpretaciones de la música del siglo XX son muy aplaudidas. Muchas gracias, Matteo.
Good afternoon, ladies and a few gentlemen. I'm very honored to talk to you about Sonia Delaunay's relation, friendship, and close collaboration with my father and grandfather and their department store, Metz&Co, in Amsterdam, where Sonia Delaunay's designs were sold from 1925 onwards until way into the late 1960s. Sonia Delaunay started her long and prolific life in Odessa as Sarah Stern in 1885 and worked right up till the age of 94. Now here you see her, 1 year old, in what must be the first picture taken of her, just before the family moved away from Odessa to Gradišť. Now, let me jump some 65 years in time, and here you see me, also as a 1 year old, a very happy child, with my mother wearing a skirt by Sonia Delaunay. Now, if we jump another 65 years in time, well, here I am giving a lecture on Sonia. Now, enough of myself, but you may understand that Sonia has been and certainly still is very important in my life. Metz&Co was a unique, small luxury department store for textiles, interior design, applied arts, and fashion in Amsterdam. And my grandfather, Joseph de Leeuw, made it for many years into the leading address in the country for luxury fabrics and avant-garde design. Metz&Co was originally founded in the Jewish quarters in Amsterdam around 1740 as a wholesale trade in French silks and luxury textiles. In 1886, at the age of 13, so at the same time you just saw the picture of Sonia, my grandfather had started out at Metz&Co as an apprentice, and he clearly proved to be a clever businessman, greatly interested in music, literature, art, and design, and he was very much inspired by the aesthetics of William Morris and influenced by the arts and craft movement. He turned Metz&Co from a wholesale into a retail store, into a department store, and moved it in 1908 to its stately premises in the center of Amsterdam and became the owner. Now, my grandfather continuously sought new forms to introduce art and design into daily life. He had started to commission fabric and furniture designs from international artists and architects for Metz's own exclusive production. Alvar Aalto, Marcel Breuer, Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe. He collaborated with Joseph Hoffmann and the Wiener Werkstätte. He did business with fashion designer Paul Poiret and his interior design atelier Maison Martin, and of course, numerous members of the DESCALZO movement. Now, unfortunately, I never knew my grandfather. He died in 1944. But after the World War, my father, Hendrik de Leeuw, carried on the artistic strategy by working with influential artists and designers of a younger generation, such as Franco Albini, Carlo Pagani, Gio Ponti, Terence Conran, Paul Kjærholm, and introduced the designs of Marie Mecco and Mary Quant to the Netherlands. The greatest mark on the Metz style was made by three different artists: the architect and designer Gerrit Rietveld, and in a period of 30 years, he created more than 75 furniture designs for Metz&Co, including the famous zigzag chair. Then the painter Bart van der Lek, one of the founding members of the style movement, and in the course of nearly 25 years, he created for Metz&Co abstract rug designs, color spectrums for fabrics, packaging, and interiors, sometimes in cooperation with Rietveld. And of course, Sonia Delaunay, not only her powerful designs, but very much her strong personality and friendship accompanied Metz&Co and my family for years. In 1973, after nearly 50 years at Metz, my father decided to sell the firm and retired from business. He died in 1978, a year before Sonia, and some 8 years later, the new owners of Metz&Co at that time planned a total conversion of the main building, and everything had to be cleared out. They were absolutely in no way interested in the past, let alone in the dusty archives, Metz&Co's own very comprehensive archives, which were stored in the bell tower of the main building. It's hard to believe, but everything was already piled into plastic bags, ready to be taken away. Now just imagine, the whole lot would have ended in the garbage. Now, by coincidence, and luckily enough, at the very last minute, we got a warning what was happening, and in an overnight action, these archives were saved. Now, it inspired me to delve again into the material and rediscover the many artists that found a forum for their creativity at Metz&Co, especially Sonia Delaunay, whom I personally had known so well, and I developed an unexpected view of her indefatigable creative talent. The same period, my grandfather started to work with designers directly for Metz's own production. The Delaunays moved back from Madrid to Paris, and Sonia set up her design studio in their large apartment on the Boulevard Malesherbes. And she registered her fabric and fashion enterprise under the name Sonia, and the word simultané became her patented trademark. Now, Metz had a similar eclectic clientele that Sonia catered for, members of the intelligentsia and the haute bourgeoisie, as you can see from this Metz catalogue of 1925. Now, Sonia's real breakthrough came in 1925 when she showed her simultané creations during the International Exhibition of Modern, Decorative and Industrial Arts in the boutique Sonia Delaunay Simultané on the Pont Alexandre III. And this is exactly when Joseph de Leeuw, my grandfather, first met Sonia in Paris in 1925. Now, my grandfather, who was always on the lookout for innovation and new talent, was well acquainted with all the important designers, fashion houses, the best silk manufacturers of Lyon and Paris. And he immediately began to buy the scarves, accessories, and fabrics Sonia produced, and continued to do so for the next few years. Now, this scarf you see here was one of the first items he acquired for Metz. Her innovative designs were exactly what he was searching for. And the original gouache of this design from the collection of the Art Décoratif in Paris is on display here in the exhibition. Now, unfortunately for Sonia, running a business did not prove to be so easy in the longer run. After all, she never ran a maison de couture like Coco Chanel, Jeanne Lanvin, or Elsa Schiaparelli, and soon the Wall Street crash and the following economic crisis hit her hard. And by the end of 1930, most remaining employees had been laid off, and with considerable debt on hand, Sonia was facing financial ruin. Now, it's often been said that the closure of the workshop, her atelier, was the moment that Sonia put her design period behind her and started to dedicate herself exclusively to painting. This is absolutely not the case. Sonia was very much a survivor, and she continued to design and became a one-woman show. The time was right, and my grandfather asked Sonia to design fabrics, especially for Metz&Co, and on the 14th of August, 1930, he commissioned his first fabric designs. And my father, who as a young man now headed the fabric department at Metz&Co, took part in the process from the beginning. As you can see, he was already wearing a Delaunay tie in 1928. In her designs, Sonia always remained a painter. Her medium was a fabric design, but her eye and her sense how to approach a composition and the stroke of her paintbrush was that of a painter. She never was a member of the style movement, which this year has been celebrating its 100th anniversary, but was very familiar with a number of painters associated with. She saw Mondrian, Van Doesburg, and Van Tongerlo, among others, regularly in Paris, and she met with Van der Leck on several occasions. Now, just compare in some designs for Metz&Co how some of these artists approach the same themes in their works as Sonia in her designs. And it's fascinating to see her approach to a grid pattern, Now, compare Mondrian's composition with grid number 4 of 1919 and Sonia's design that was done for Metz in 1930. And Bart van der Lek's design for a rug compared with Sonia's design, both of 1933. Or this color composition of Van Doesburg compared with Sonia's design that originated in 1930 but was developed for Metz in 1933. Now, the only difference with these other painters is that they did not turn them into such nice ties as you can see here. Now, Sonia in her work was very orderly and very methodical. She certainly was extremely disciplined. And since August 1924, she had kept a meticulous record of her designs with reference numbers, sketches, notes, and, when applicable, the buyer in what was called her livre noir. They were black books bound in linen that cover the whole period from 1924 till 1940. And by then she had created no less than 1,500 design numbers. And later she was to make an additional 500 designs, which indicates the important position they occupied within her oeuvre. And I would like to give you an idea of how Sonia worked. Here you see the first page of her first livre noir, number 1 of 1924, with a small sketch of the design in color and underneath the various coloris, the different color combinations for the fabric. There is the design number, the date of creation, whom she sold it to, and the name of the engraver. And on the left, you see a black and white photograph. She only did this in the very beginning when she patented her designs, and the patent registration number was also recorded. Now, as you see, it's very detailed stuff. In her later livre noirs, this was all very much more simplified. But now, here you see the equivalent of what Metz&Co did. This is a fabric book of Metz with Sonia's design number 1318 of 1934. And on the left, you see Sonia's original signed gouache, and underneath are noted Metz's own production costs. And on the right, as in Sonia's livre noir, various color schemes and, of course, small swatches of the printed silk. And this fabric book is in the exhibition here. So, and if you take a close look, and I mean a very close look, and I hope you have better eyesight than I do, you can see a very small detail written in, namely the fact that the crêpe de Chine and the other fabrics, the crêpe Georgette, only 30 meters were printed, 30 meters. So you get an idea of how exclusive and what a work of art some of these fabrics were. And when a fabric was produced, Sonia recorded her designs for herself, but also for her client on a special design card, the so-called pancarte. It had, like in the livre noir, the design number, the date, a small gouache or sketch, and the various color combinations that the fabric was to be produced in, and sometimes the name of the colors or the color number. Now, Sonia had developed her distinctively own palette with over 400 colors that had their own reference number or name, like crocodile or angora or ruin. Now, this is the pancarte of design 205, an earlier simultané design of 1927 that Metz produced a little later. And this design had no less than 24 color schemes. Now, the other stages of a design were the dessin de travail, the working drawing, the scale drawing, and the calque, designs on tracing paper in various color schemes. And of some designs, the final master print still exists. And sometimes these designs were sent by post back and forth from Paris to Amsterdam, or from Amsterdam to the printer and backwards, folded in half or in four, with instructions or comments scribbled in. Orange is too dull, or the salmon-colored is too salmon-colored, make a new color. Sometimes small pieces of the drawings or the fabrics were simply cut out for reference and would end up glued into Metz's or Sonia's own fabric books. And as you can imagine, the designs certainly did not always receive the museum treatment that they enjoy today. They were working material. Now, please have a look at the various stages of one of Sonia's most fascinating designs of 1934. And here you see the signed design. Now, you feel how the colors dance in constant movement, like a whirlwind, and how the different colors react to each other, as if they are dancing a tarantella. And then you see the pancarte with some softer color combinations, and here you see 4 of them, and you see how the other sets of color combinations react differently to each other. Now, next are the designs on transparent paper with, again, different color combinations, and they served as an easy and correct copy of the original. And then you had the master print that was prepared by the printer Petit Didier. Now, Petit Didier was a printer that did quite a number of designs for Metz, not only Sonia's. But this master print was also the copyright, because there was written on it that Petit Didier could only and exclusively print it for Metz&Co. And last but not least, the final product, the fabric. And you can see how well the movement of the rotating discs of colors is preserved. As you see, Sonia's design gives the impression of great spontaneity. Now, when a design is transposed to a textile, often this effect of lightheartedness is lost, because then the engraver takes over. And if you don't set the highest standards, the lines have a tendency to become stiff or too straight or too regular, with other words, boring. And then the whole initial spontaneity is lost in the technical process. Now, Sonia had studied the techniques of woodcut and printmaking with the German painter Rudolf Grossmann already very early, so she was extremely skilled in having her ideas transferred from one medium to another. And in that sense, she found an ideal partner in de Leeuw, who was equally demanding in turning the final product into a work of art of its own, ensuring that the colors and the color contrasts were exactly as intended, and that the painterly flow was maintained in the fabrics. Now, the Metz fabrics were mostly hand-printed luxury silks, crêpe de chine, crêpe georgette, twill or tussore, all sorts of mousseline, silks as well as cotton. There were also roll-printed cottons, and that were therefore produced in greater quantity, as well as woolen fabrics, woven materials, rayon, artificial silk, very new and in at that time, as well as linen for upholstery or curtains. And many were produced in France, but also in Germany, in England, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and even as far as Japan for some of the most luxurious scarves. By the time Sonia started to design for Metz, she had developed a great feel for the supple movement of material when worn, as well as for the repetitive structure of a fabric design. So some of the large geometric contrasting color blocks and pastilles that Sonia initially had started off with in her simultané designs, they changed to finer structures. She played with squares, oblongs, circles, crosses, dots, stripes, strokes, and zigzags in countless combinations. And God, I hope I'm not turning the simultaneous translator crazy now. But all these themes in themselves form a new motive in ingenious repeat. Dots become blocks, crosses form stripes. Everything is formed into poetry with its own rhythm. It's fascinating. Now, as of the 27th of February 1933, Sonia Delaunay had started to keep a diary, and they are now in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. And reading her journal of that time, one encounters an overwhelmingly active person with a loaded schedule and an iron discipline. She was busy with interior decorating. She did dress fittings with clients. She saw agents to try and sell a design to, whether for fabrics or for carpets. And without employees, she ran her one-woman show in order to keep the Delaunay household going, only assisted by a seamstress or a lady to embroider. And Metz&Co appears already on the very first page of her diary, and one gets a very clear picture of the enormous care and energy that she and the Leeuws, father and son, spent working together over the years. Countless letters, telephone calls, and visits were noted down. The more Joseph de Leeuw visited Paris, the closer the friendship with Sonia became. Now, my grandmother had just died in 1930, so it is not surprising that their relation intensified on a work and a personal level. In July 1933, he invited Sonia to travel back with him to his house in Holland, accompanied by his youngest daughter, Kitty, my aunt, and Sonia's son, Charles. Robert did not join them. For the first time, Sonia saw and admired the department store that she had been dealing with so intensively. And Sonia visited the painter van der Lek, and she also met with him again on the next 2-week stay with the de Leeuws in August 1934. This time, she was joined by Robert, her son Charles, and the dog. Now, in spite of the fact that my grandfather at some point had very much liked to have married Sonia, Robert and my grandfather were always on very good terms. An exhibition in Rietveld's newly designed cupola on the roof of Metz building in Amsterdam, a daring and a progressive construction of steel and glass, was showing her new designs with large geometrical patterns. The press singled out Sonia's geometric designs, comparing her with Mondrian and van der Lek. And this is very interesting because it shows the critic perceived Sonia as a painter. And Sonia liked these designs. She used them often for her own interior decoration. She regularly exhibited these fabrics, for instance, in the Petit Palais in Paris in 1935, together with 6 other Metz designs. And you can see she is absolutely in her element here, an abstract painter using an abstract composition for a large canvas. Now, up to now, I've mainly focused on Sonia's geometrical designs. But when you design fabrics, or when you're involved in fashion in some ways, there is no way of escaping from creating floral designs. Again, she uses very much her own language, and sometimes her Russian roots clearly shine through when she creates very simple folkloristic motifs, which she had already used in her first interior decorations in Madrid, which you saw earlier. Now, many works may come as a surprise, but also with her florals, on a closer look, one can always recognize the stroke of her brush, the painter at work. So let me take you through a few examples. This is one of the first designs that Metz&Co produced in 1930. You can see how she used tiny, simple, geometric forms, squares, triangles, and stripes to form a small group of flowers. Quite simple, but ingenious. By softening the lines, she perceived what would happen with the design on the fabric. It starts to flow and the geometric form gets an immediate, delicate softness. The next example is one where you straight away recognize a folkloristic, nearly naive motive, but it's not as naive as it appears on first sight, because by turning one flow of the flower upside down, you get an enormous feeling of movement. And here, needless to say, Sonia is in her element. Here, Sonia takes a totally different route. No folklore, no geometry, but bold lines of color that form a mysterious, nearly threatening combination of flowers and leaves and a dark background, and that gives it a very chic appearance. Now, when the black background is exchanged for another color, it gets a surprising, totally different feeling, and Sonia knew what she was doing. And what is autumn without falling leaves? In the original designs, the leaves are pointing up, but in a fabric or on a dress, of course, this doesn't matter at all. The fabric was made in a cotton voile, which gives it a softer touch, as if the leaves are dancing, happily, even elegantly, in a joyful play of colors. Now, what a contrast to this design. Here, Sonia is in her element with a bold, strong, contrasting color composition. You can see the abstract color painter at work, that a flower, a little bouquet is formed, looks as if it were just a coincidence. The design was made in a beautiful crêpe de chine in different colors. The motifs are very small, but they jump out with such energy. Now, I want to show you something I only came across when I was preparing for the Delaunay exhibition in Paris a couple of years ago. And I was studying Sonia's early portrait paintings of 1907, 1908. And I was just focusing on the eyes. And it struck me that if you concentrate on the composition of the eye, you already had pure Sonia, the painter of circular movement and color she was going to turn into. And that her sense, her feeling of color, her very own palette, was already established before she had met Robert and before she had turned into Sonia Delaunay. Now, this would take up a whole separate lecture, so I won't go into long details now, but if you watch the eyes of the Jeune Finlandaise of 1907, you see what I mean. And look at the colors. Now, compare it to a floral design she created more than 30 years later, namely in 1939. It's one of her last pre-war designs. It reminds a little of a Monet colorful water lilies. But compare the colors with her palette of 1907, and as I just said, it was all there in the beginning. I found this fascinating. Now let's jump to another side of Sonia. Quite a contrast to all the other floral designs. This is the 60s, except that this design was done in 1933, 30 years ahead of her time. This is op art. And Metz made it into a muslin silk with various two-way color combinations, with either the motif in color on a white fond or the other way around, a colored fond with a very light motif. Now, in the many exhibitions in the past on Sonia Delaunay I've been involved with, I sometimes, mostly in the beginning, would come across rather academic curators, and when I would mention Sonia did floral designs, they would just roll their eyes and say, no, for heaven's sakes, no floral designs, only abstract forms, only geometrical forms. Well, little did they know Sonia's flowers are fantastic. And throughout the 30s, Robert and Sonia were in constant financial trouble. Robert was hardly ever selling any paintings, and Sonia was working over hours to make ends meet. And from the end of 1934, Leeuw arranged for his youngest daughter, Kitty, my aunt, who was just 19 years old at the time, to take design lessons from Sonia for a year, together with some other pupils that Sonia took on. And Sonia took this job very seriously. It provided her with some extra income, and she quite enjoyed it. Still, the Delaunays were in debt and clearly living beyond their means. And soon after, Robert and Sonia left the Boulevard Malesherbes, and by 1936, they had moved into the much smaller apartment at the 16 Rue Saint-Simon, where Sonia lived for the rest of her life. As Sonia worked at home and continued creating new designs and dressing a small group of haute bourgeoisie ladies for whom she often used Metz fabrics. And here you see her in her atelier, there in the middle. The picture has been used in many publications, including my own, and it was always thought that this was Sonia with two of her students. And it was only recently, when I was in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, preparing this exhibition in Madrid, I discovered in her diaries that she had arranged with Florence Harry, the well-known photographer, to take pictures of her in her new studio for a Swiss fabric magazine. And the reporter of this magazine and her friend, they posed as if they were pupils with the Metz fabric designed 1303, which had just arrived in the mail on the table in front of them. Now, my recent research in the Bibliothèque Nationale gave me totally new insight into Sonia's life in the late 30s. As I had always presumed and written that Sonia had more or less stopped designing by the time she started to prepare for the Paris World Fair in 1937. This turned out to be incorrect, and I have to correct myself for what I wrote years ago already. I was able now to identify, and this time properly, date a whole new series of designs of her new work, for me very exciting, and I can tell you I was fascinated by this because it proved that Sonia never slowed down in searching for new forms. This design is actually a new version of a design that originated in 1929. Now, just take time to let this explosion of color work on you. Metz edited this already in 1937, and this fabric, a crêpe de Chine, was made in Japan in 1938. And its boldness and freshness is just wonderful. Just look at the effect the color green has on this composition, because in the next design I will show you, you can see what this similar single color does in a totally different composition. This design of 1938 is part of a series of very small checkers. The small gouache is mounted on paper and it's not bigger than 10 centimeters. In fact, it's even smaller. Now, when you see it on such large scale of the screen, you can see the power of the structure, the power of simplicity, and what colors. Again, these small, decisive squares of the green give it such vivid accents. And like with her op art flower you saw not long ago, this is, for me, totally the 60s. And this shows Sonia making a clear masculine statement. As the gouache is painted on dark paper, it gets even an extra strength, and Sonia is very much in charge here, as if her paintbrush with red, white, and teal blue threatens, "Now don't argue with me." And this all should not come as a surprise, because since the exhibition of 1937, she had started to paint in oil again, which, with only very few exceptions, she had not done for 20 years. And she also started on gouaches that spoke a similar language, as if everything in her creative head was coming together. It was the beginning of the Sonia Delaunay that was to flower in the next stage of her long, long life a number of years later. And this gouache of 1938, so the same time as the fabric designs that you just saw, sums up the artist Sonia Delaunay. I don't have to describe what you see, it is all there. Now, she exhibited this gouache when she took part in an exhibition at the Petit Palais in Paris in June of that same year. And apart from one much larger gouache, it was the only new work that was on display. All the other works that were for sale, she had 25, were all from 1916 and before, like the Balbulier, the Marché aux Mignots, her Finlandaise portraits, the flamenco singer, and some of these glorious works are in the exhibition now. And they didn't get sold on this occasion. Now, also this gouache at that time was offered for 700 francs and nobody was interested. It stayed with Sonia for some years to come. And Sonia and Robert saw my father and my grandfather, as well as Kitty, regularly. And shortly before the outbreak of the war, they were aware of the political time bomb that was looming over them. On the other hand, it was business as usual. Even on the day that the war broke out, my father was in Paris discussing new fabric designs that he wanted Sonia to create. Now, history took its course, and the next 5 years were times of endurance. It changed everything. The Delaunays fled to the south of France, but Robert had been suffering from cancer for some time, and he died in October 1941. And for Sonia, they were very hard, uncertain times financially and emotionally. Now, Metz&Co had become out of the question. The Nazis had taken over. Joseph de Leeuw, my grandfather, was dispossessed and he was forced to relinquish the company. He was deported and he died in a concentration camp. But the post-war challenges were faced with new energy. Back in Paris, Sonia was painting again, and her main aim was to establish recognition for Robert Delaunay's work. It took up enormous amount of care, time, and energy, but Sonia Delaunay's first post-war designs for Metz&Co date from June 1946. My father, luckily enough, and otherwise I would have not been here, managed to escape during the war and was only slowly regaining control of Metz&Co, which after all had been confiscated. And as you can understand, silk printing and the weaving facilities were very limited, and the restriction on luxury goods and foreign currency was a great handicap. But nothing could stop them to continue their collaboration. And Sonia noted happily in her diary in June the 9th of 1946, "I have set myself to work, made some fabric designs for Metz whilst listening to the sport news on the radio. It's my favorite program. It's lively and not stupid. I made 13 designs numbered 4601 to 4613, and they just came out just very easily." And she had already started a new numbering system by combining year and design number, which makes it easy to distinguish them from the ones that she had made before the war, those in her livre noir. And by the way, Sonia loved working with the radio on, and it's actually quite fun to read what designs she made when she listened to a jazz program or what she made when she would listen to the Symphonie Fantastique. Now, in terms of form, these post-war designs for Metz&Co are a very different world from the paintings she was producing at the time, just like the gouache you saw a few minutes ago. But they contain the same daring freshness in the flow of colors. She created a similar mixture of geometric and floral designs like she did before, but in general, her designs became larger again. Again, she experimented with op art, and in this design, she uses the straightforward lozenge, but she curves the line to make an optical effect. As you can see, she still used the same type of pancarte that she already had used in the 20s. And this is a cotton fabric of a similar type design. Metz produced it in 1952. The pattern is quite large, and the irregularly painted cross line, it just gives you the feeling of a painting. This design of 1948 is yet again a totally different style. She calls this design tulips, also in her diaries when she refers to it. Now, I can hear you think, tulips. I know I always refer to them as the paprikas, the pimientos. But as with some of her geometrical designs, where one color block pops out with a total contrast, just see what this yellow pimiento, tulip, does in changing the rhythm. Throughout the late 40s and the early 1950s, she started to experiment again with a series of rayures, parallel color stripes, a motive that had preoccupied her since she started to design. And they take a special place within her oeuvre. Many were made into a fabric. But the point is that these color stripe combinations were for Sonia a vitally important color exercise, an abstract color exercise. In the same way that Chopin composed not only piano sonatas, but many, many etudes, and they have an essential beauty in their own right. For Metz&Co, she made a large number of these rayures with many, many variations. Now, when I once suggested one of these single stripes to a curator many years ago, she looked at me as if I was making a joke. "I'm not going to exhibit dishcloths," she said. Well, there we are. It was wasted on her, but I'm happy to say that Tussenborner-Misse, they loved the dishcloth, as you can see in the exhibition later on. But see what you can do with a single stripe. And by folding over the stripe, so you get a zigzag, you get pure Sonia. In 1952, it was a hit. It was on the cover of the spring catalogue. And as time is limited, the last design I wanted to show you is an abstract geometric block design that was produced for many, many years since 1951. It was exhibited for the first time at Metz in the Rietveld cupola in an exhibition with furniture of Rietveld and rugs of van der Lek, the three longtime stars of Metz&Co. And Sonia came over for the occasion. Not long after that, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam acquired from Metz&Co a whole series of large rolls of Sonia's late fabrics for their collection, and they have been exhibited many, many times. And this fabric is printed on linen, with other words, canvas. And if you have time to look at it in the exhibition, you will see it totally gives you a feeling of a painted canvas. This fabric, in fact, you can see it on the right, is 8 meters long. And of course, or unfortunately, you can't show all of it. You have to adapt it to the height of the ceiling. And it's actually the most complex fabric to install in an exhibition. It may look like nothing, but in fact, it takes hours and a whole crew to unroll, roll again, hang, drape, and when you make the slightest mistake, you can start all over again. But needless to say, the crew at Tussenborner-Misse was wonderful. As Sonia was concentrating more and more on her painting, on her own painting, and was being taken seriously as a painter in her own regard, as opposed to being the wife of Robert Delaunay, she eventually had started to free herself from the image of a decorative artist. And in 1955, she wrote to my father, "I'm always working a lot, and I have several exhibitions at the moment and many, many more in the offing. I only do fabric designs to order." And indeed, from then on, at the age of 70, for the next 25 years, she pursued her path as a painter with her relentlessly vigorous joie de vivre and became well established. And her impressive large-scale compositions of the 1950s and 1960s are proof of her artistic strength and confidence. She had her first major retrospective in 1958 in Bielefeld with more than 250 works, including her designs and including her latest designs for Metz&Co at that time, some of which you just saw, and here she is, but you've seen her already in the opening of this exhibition in front of one of her great paintings of that same year. And this painting is also on display here in the exhibition. And of course, in 1967, she had a huge retrospective exhibition at the Musée National d'Art Moderne in Paris, and here in a photograph with my father. And on the right, you see a painting, Rythme Couleur, of 1964, which is also on display here in the exhibition. Now, of course, nothing stopped her from making numerous lithographs or designing books, tapestries, mosaics, playing cards, and occasionally fabrics and scarves. Now, my first meeting with Sonia is deeply ingrained because I was almost 4 years old and with my parents and my sister in Paris to pay her a visit in 1956. And I still hear my father say, "Madame Delaunay is a famous painter," with the intention to impress upon my sister and me that we were supposed to show good manners. Now, small as I was, I knew what a painter was, and that in an atelier one was supposed to shut up and behave. And I was fascinated by Madame Delaunay, by Sonia, with her warm, cordial voice and her Russian accent, except I didn't understand a word because I didn't speak French at the time. But I stood at the top of the staircase of her atelier, and this unknown world of color just burst open in front of me. A gigantic atelier window, huge plants right up to the ceiling, and an enormous life-size paintings with these radiant, bright circles, an explosion of color. I was instantly high, so overwhelmed that I nearly crashed down the stairs. Now, Sonia's magical world has accompanied me, and for a very long time, since my youth. And looking back from this era of labels and logos, it's an overwhelming luxury, a luxury of color and beauty, of space, of strength, and of light. Sonia was never a designer in the usual sense. Her designs were not subject to the whims of fashion. They are timeless. She remained true to herself, a versatile artist, living her art and living for her art. She made no difference whether she applied her art to a painting or to a fabric design. And as Sonia said, when art is within you, it can be everywhere. Thank you.